Welcome, everybody. We are just about to get started. If you'd like, you can go ahead and add your information down in the chat while we get started. I know a lot of people have already begun. Okay, and it's time to begin, so let's begin. We've got a lot of really good content for you. Welcome, everybody. We're really excited to have so many people coming here and attending the equity strand of the PBIS forum. We've got over 1,000 of you in this session, and so I am super excited for that opportunity. I want to start with a Strand overview, kind of describe what the day is going to look like. You probably noticed that the equity work is going across the entire conference. So hopefully you had a chance to see Dr. George Sugai's keynote yesterday and then Dr. Tamika LaSalle's breakout after that. If not, then you can go back and watch those via video. They'll also show up on pbis.org as well. But today we are going to have 3 sessions here. One of them is the one that you're seeing right now, myself and Dr. Tabitha Baldy, who's I'll introduce momentarily. And then a great session on equity in school discipline, particularly related to professional development by Dr. Ruthie Pano-Simmons and Beth Hill. And then the 3rd session on culturally responsive practices within PBIS, Melanie Leverson, Kent Smith, and Dr. Jennifer Rose. And to get going, I do want to start, even though this is a virtual conference and we're all attending from various places, with a land acknowledgement. Where I am anyways, in Eugene, Oregon, would like to start by noting that the University of Oregon is located on Kalapuya Alihi, the traditional indigenous homeland of the Kalapuya peoples. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, the Kalapuya people were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed to the Coast Reservation in Western Oregon. Today, Kalapuya descendants are primarily citizens of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians. And they continue to make important contributions to their communities, to the University of Oregon, to the state of Oregon, and to the world. I also want to acknowledge the equity work group that is doing all of this. If you see something that you are appreciating, it probably wasn't me. It was probably one of these people on here, a really dedicated group of people who have been doing this work day in and day out and guiding and shaping these enhancements to the PBIS framework. To get you started with today, I want to lay out our expectations for you. And shared agreements. So we've got be responsible, be respectful, and be safe. Overall, most of these are pretty clear. One of the things that I do want to acknowledge is the use of chat. Yesterday, I saw lots of really positive, supportive, great challenging questions in chat, which I really appreciate. I do hope I'm not able to see your chat very well while I'm presenting, but please continue to do that throughout. And just so you know, these slides, or at least the slides as of a couple of days ago, are already available for you in the file tab, so you'll be able to see those and walk you through. Use the chat as I described. Also, right next to the chat, you can click over to that polls and you'll be able to ask us, submit questions for us to answer at the end of the session, and then also ask a few, and I'll go over that as well. And you're probably getting familiar with Pathable and how all of that works. Just note there is, if you click on a person's name, all of a sudden it'll shoot you into information about them. Don't worry, you can just go right back. And if you run into any trouble, just go right up to that help desk spot and you'll be able to find it right there. The other thing that we want you to be able to do is situate this within the work that you're doing. And in that process, I want you to be thinking about how does this fit in with the work that we're doing? Who would be the people on the teams that would do this work, whether that's in your school, whether that's in your district, region, state, and so on. What are the things that we need to stop doing so that we can make room for this work to happen? And then also, how are we going to assess how well we've implemented it and whether it's working for us? And in that, you're noticing that we're talking about how this all fits into the systems that you have. So many of us are familiar with the interlocking circles of PBIS Elements. And if you're not, you can review some of the introductory sessions on pbis.org and look at that. But I want to share with you some advancements in this area and some of the evolution of what we've been doing. And you'll notice we've got outcomes, data, practices, and systems. But we've really been focusing lately on centering equity in the work that we do. And I want you to be really cautious and maybe even skeptical of if you've seen organizations slap equity right on top of their things and say, guess what, now we're equitable. I think it's really important for people to be able to describe how equity fits into the work that, that we do. And so I'm going to describe that, how it fits with the circles that you're familiar with in here and the work that we've been doing from the equity work group that cuts across this. Number one on top, when we think about outcomes, we want to recognize that we need to hold high expectations for each and every student to be successful. That also means that we do not accept structural inequities as excuses not to reach and teach every student. There are going to be some things that are out of control of education, and yet we cannot use that to say that's why that student fails or that's why that group of students is not being successful. Now, in relation to data, it's really important that we disaggregate any of our data by student group to ensure that it's not just working for most, but that it's working for each student group equitably. And whether that's by race, ethnicity, whether that's by disability status, language status, gender identity, all of those are important groups for disaggregating and looking to see if we're being successful. Then in relation to practices, we need to adapt what we're doing with students to change it so that it's a better match for the needs and values of our students, of their families, and of the surrounding community. And that often means asking them, and sometimes difficult questions, about how well it's working for them and what would work better, what would have a better fit. And then finally, when we look at systems, we want to have those systems to support educators through, in this case, with this lens, equity-focused professional development. So they see how equity fits into the work that they're doing throughout. And the thing that's really nice is you'll see that throughout this whole equity strand. So we're going to talk about disaggregating data by student group in this session. Then you'll get in the next session about systems and professional development. And then in the third session, you'll see about cultural responsiveness. So with that out of the way, I'm really excited for us to get into the session that we've got here. So my name is Kent. I'm from the University of Oregon. I'm one of the co-directors. I also get the honor of facilitating the equity work group. We're really, really excited to have Dr. Tabitha Baldy from Colquitt County Schools in Georgia to be sharing with us. So she's going to share out her exemplar information. And then just to give you a little bit of info behind the scenes, Dr. Maria Santiago Rosario is going to be staffing the chat, which I can't see particularly well, but you'll all be able to see and communicate with her throughout. And then our tech facilitator, Anthony Raj, is going to be making sure that everything is working for you so you can go straight in with him as well. So to start things off and to see how things, see who is here with us in this very, very large group, I'd love for you to click over to polls and answer two different polls. One is, what is your level? And then the other is, what is your role? And you have to go in, if you click over to polls and then click to vote, that is your ticket to see the answers of what's around. And so I'm just going to click over and see if I can magically find that myself. As you're getting a chance to vote, I'm going to share a little bit of info. Some of you have asked sort of, is this being recorded? The answer is yes, absolutely. If you are wondering, if I'm registered for D1, am I also registered for D2 and D3? Yes, you signed up for the whole strand, so you are in. So you click over to polls. I'm going to click on respond here, put myself in there somewhere. And then I'll be able to see where we are with that. And oh, the order's backwards. So I'm modeling making mistakes, which I think is pretty darn important in the work that we do. So I'm going to click. See who we've got here. So almost half people from at the school level, which is wonderful because I think we're taking in this one a little bit more of a specific school approach. And then let's see, in terms of roles, we've got people at working directly with students, and then also a good number of people providing district training or coaching. So thank you very much for doing that. All right, so moving on here. For what you should be able to do by the rest of the time. You should be able to, with the information that you have and with the recording and with the PowerPoint slides, be able to share results related to effects of PBIS on equity and school discipline. Also be able to describe what an equity-focused PBIS approach or PBIS framework with equity in mind. Identify some common errors in implementation, and Dr. Baldy's going to share with you their implementation story and kind of walk through, and then be able to take some concrete steps for where to move in terms of district commitment, but everything that we're doing is in relation to that as well. Okay, and so for those of you who are raising your hand, thank you for being active and engaged in it. We won't be able to answer your raised hand, so you may want to just unraise your hand and instead answer within the chat, or also if you click over to polls, that's where you can ask the questions for the Q&A at the end of the session. I also want to share some ground rules for the work that we are doing. And these are the ground rules that we use when we do professional development with school teams, with school personnel, and with districts, and with trainers too. We got 4 ground rules. Number 1 is ask questions throughout. In this session, I'm going to ask you to use the chat for some comments, but if you really want a question, start adding those to that poll section. You'll be able to type that in. Number 2 is speak your truth, knowing that your truth is different from other people's truths, and that is perfectly fine, and that's actually the point of all of this. Number 3, let's make no assumptions about each other except good intentions, that we're all coming to this work to improve outcomes for all student groups, and especially those who our data are showing have the most need. And then number 4, get comfortable with discomfort. This work is challenging for some of us. This could be new information to you that you were unaware of. For some, this is old hat, and yet if you're not familiar with that and not normalizing discomfort, it's very difficult to get the work done. So at any given moment, you might feel like one of these 2 dogs here. So to share a little bit about discomfort and why we do this work, I think it's really important for us to acknowledge those who have been victims of the systems that we have here. Some of these names might be familiar to you. Some of them may not be, but these are Black individuals who have been killed either by law enforcement or by other citizens. And a couple who I want to highlight because it's close to the work that we do. And geographically, Ahmaud Arbery and Rashard Brooks earlier this year in Georgia, both murdered. And it's really important that we recognize not just their loss, but the effect that that has on the communities that we serve. And that is a really important why for us. I'm going to encourage you all also to add in the chat, what is your why for this work? Why are you attending this Strand? Why have you been attending the sessions yesterday? Why are you going to attend the engaging families from underrepresented groups in the family session tomorrow? And as we do this, I'm going to walk you through, I'm going to share effects of PBIS on racial equity and school discipline, talk about our approach, and then Dr. Baldy is going to share out a case study of district implementation with a research project as well. So if you go to PBIS.org and go to the topics, you'll be able to find a lot of the information related to the equity session and the content that the work group has been developing. One of them is this evaluation brief looking at the effects of PBIS on racial equity in school discipline. And we had heard and had been talking with people, and there was this perception of people saying, PBIS makes things worse in terms of racial equity in school discipline. And that would, of course, be very alarming to us if that was the case. And we would want to know and be recommending something different if that was true. And so this was a study looking at national data and comparing schools implementing PBIS with fidelity to national data. And so if you look here, if you look on this side over here, what you see is this is the percent of students who have been suspended out of school at least once in during the school year. So an out of school suspension. What this says is that overall in the US schools that are in blue, 5% of students. For schools implementing PBIS, it's 4%, so a 20% decrease. But what's interesting is it's not all the way across. And so we see less discipline disproportionality for Black students, for multiracial students, and for Pacific Islander students. Now, how many of you look at this and say, wow, you know, I problem solved, I'm good to go? Probably nobody. This is a really good example of us saying, at the very least, PBIS doesn't make things worse. It might make things marginally better if implemented, but what we really need to do if we want to improve equity in school discipline, we've got to have a stronger focus in the systems that we have. And I know people have been asking in the chat in terms of the videos. The videos should be available within about 10 minutes of the end of the session within Pathable. Pathable will be up for a little bit, and then those will actually transfer over to links on PBIS.org. So you'll never not have access to those once they show up. So thank you for asking about that. So one of the things that we think about, if PBIS has a little bit of an improvement in terms of racial equity and school discipline, are there specific parts of PBIS that are most predictive of equity? So there has been some research on that. And there are 3 significant predictors of decreased disproportionality, specifically racial disproportionality and the difference between exclusionary discipline for Black students and all other students or white students. Number 1, schools that use data for decision-making more often have lower disproportionality in school discipline. Number 2, schools that implement classroom PBIS systems have better equity in school discipline. And then number 3, multiple studies showing that the higher implementation of reward or acknowledgement systems, the lower the racial disproportionality in school discipline. So that sort of tells us maybe not only do we have a discipline gap, but maybe we also have an acknowledgement or praise gap for students, and in this case for Black students. So given that, what do we need to do to actually make our school systems more equitable for all student groups? That's where the work of the equity work group in the center has come along. So we've got this 5-point intervention approach that describes overall what are the most effective ways of doing it. Some of that comes from the research that we've been doing for the past few years. Some of that comes from our experience here. But I'm going to share with you the results of some studies. And what you can see is using this specific approach, there have now been multiple studies in peer-reviewed journals showing that implementing the PBIS framework with an equity focus can reduce those gaps even further. So I'm going to share with you one of these so far. If you can look, this comes from the state of Wisconsin. This is an evaluation brief you can find on pbis.org as well. So this is over time, schools this is elementary schools implementing PBIS plus a school-wide early reading model and attention to cultural responsiveness that you'll get when you attend D3, the last of the equity strand. What you can see here, the best way of looking at this, and this is once again that out of school suspension risk index. What this says, if you look first at that red line right here, what it says is about 11% of students in these schools before implementation were suspended out of school at least once. And then you can see over the course of implementation, that dropped down to 4%. So then when you start looking at other groups, if you look at this blue bar right here, that's specifically for Black students, about 16%. So that not only did it decrease, but it actually narrowed the gap to 6%. And you can see some similar outcomes, although not closing that gap as much for students with disabilities as well. So students with IEPs, that's that yellow line right there. All right. So what is an equity-focused PBIS approach? And some of you have been asking about what is the definition of equity. We're going to focus specifically here on equity in school discipline or equitable outcomes. But this definition of equity that we have has these 4 parts. So meaning that we hold high expectations for all students, that we make sure that our systems are reflective of students and their families and their needs, that we put the systems in place to support educators in becoming more aware of their identities and their students' identities, and then also that we look at data to ensure that the outcomes are equitable. So the way that we've done this is we've split this into 3 parts. One is assessing data to identify root causes. 2 is making sure that our behavior strategies, particularly in classrooms, are culturally responsive. And then number 3, that we teach about this concept of implicit bias and strategies to recognize it. So you'll see those coming throughout today. So I'm going to start with each of these in turn here. Number 1, when we start looking at our data, the most obvious place to look and where people start is looking at where are there racial inequities, either in our discipline data or in perceptions of school climate as well. Then we also look at what are some other parts of other data pieces that we might want to look at. So that includes looking at our PBIS systems. Number 1 for overall fidelity and specifically paying attention to our use of data for decision-making and our acknowledgement systems. But we also want to look a little bit more closely and guide teams through identifying where are there hidden biases in the systems that we have. where are our expectations or our behavior matrices are related to those maybe us defining what is acceptable based on our dominant culture, middle class standards of behavior. And then we start classifying anything that doesn't line up with that dominant culture or dominant white culture as being wrong. So we look at that, we interrogate it, we do surveys of students, surveys of families, also conduct walkthroughs. So we move throughout the school as well and look at things like representation of imagery around the school, representation in our media center or library materials, and even within our curriculum. And then also we look at identifying what we call VDPs and EDPs and look really closely at our discipline data. So I'm going to define those for us here. A VDP, or a vulnerable decision point, is a specific discipline decision that is more susceptible to the influences of our own implicit biases than other decisions. And there's two things that make a decision point a vulnerable decision point. Number one, it's the elements of the situation. And then number two, it's how we're feeling when all of this is happening. So what is our decision state or what's going on in our minds when we're doing this? So that's a VDP. We also look at something called an EDP, or an equitable decision point. And an EDP is a decision situation that our data shows is not influenced by bias, that we have equality, that we don't have disproportionality in our school discipline. And this one is a real game changer because it's really nice to be able to show teams. It's really nice to be able to show all school staff instead of this is what you're doing wrong, this is what you're doing wrong, this is what you're doing wrong, you are all terrible people. Instead, you say, here are situations where we need to focus our efforts in making more equitable decisions that line up with our values. Here are situations where we're actually doing really well. What are some elements of those decisions that we're doing really well that we can help inform where we need to focus our most effort? And so you can use a data discipline system or a discipline data system that allows you to disaggregate your patterns of data by racial group, by disability status, by language status. If you don't have a system like this, we do have one at the University of Oregon. It's called SWIS, or the School-Wide Information System. We offer that at cost, and I make no dollars whatsoever from the use of that. It's based on the research that we have. We just a couple days ago just retooled our Swiss equity report to give you information that you need, because some of the racial equity data in school discipline is a little more complicated than the basic things that you're familiar with looking at. So this equity report gives you the pictures that you need. It allows you to look at referrals and out-of-school suspensions separately. It also allows you to look differently by different student group comparisons. And then the thing that's really nice is you can actually click and get dynamic interpretive sentences that tell you in sentence form what your data look like in your school. So there are other discipline data systems that you could use. This one is just the one that's closest to us and more connected to the research on what people need. All right, so that's looking at assessing data. The next one is cultural responsive behavior strategies. And what we do in working with teams is to go through our core practices of PBIS and look to make changes in the systems that we have and the strategies that we use to ensure that those students who we've identified through our data that are most subject to exclusionary discipline, what we can do to make that better. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a description right here of what this looks like. Some of you might be familiar with these 4 boxes that you show for us to understand behavior. This is actually a really useful thing for us to look at specifically for racial inequities in school discipline. And so what a possible coercive cycle or chain looks like here is, and you could actually look at your own data to identify this. What this says is that when students from the groups that are most at risk, and most of the time, that's going to be Black or African American students. When students have few positive interactions with adults, view school as less relevant, and they have negative interactions, racial microaggressions, conflicts with adults, lack of clarity in expectations, they might engage in what we might sometimes or previously called problem behavior, but more likely are calling unwanted behavior or unexpected behavior. And then that student is sent out of the classroom, excluded, or out of that social interaction. So what we do is we say, where can we change our systems to interrupt these coercive cycles? So number one, we define what we want to see and we teach that to students. Define not only how we're supposed to treat each other, but also what to do when we are disrespected. We teach those directly to students. We build acknowledgement systems so that students have more positive interactions with adults as they go. And also we provide more instructional responses than simply sending a student out of the classroom. And each of those is informed by our data and what systems we have, the information we have that we can tailor a specific interaction response. What we're trying to do is change from a coercive cycle to a constructive cycle that builds up as opposed to continues to go down. And what this says is when students have more positive interactions with adults, when school systems, the curriculum, the building looks more relevant to them, they might have fewer experiences of academic failure, fewer microaggressions to have to deal with, fewer conflicts with adults. When they do, they use the desired and functional social skills, and we're prompting them to do that. And when they don't, then we respond instructionally in a coaching way as opposed to excluding a student. So what does that look like for us here? When you put all of those things together, that's where we've been working for the past few years in developing this equity-focused PBIS approach. I'm going to show you really, really quickly so that we got a chance to talk through some of this other stuff, some of our findings. So here's a school that we have worked with using this approach called Project React, which is for racial equity, assess data, cultural responsive behavior practices, and teaching about implicit bias and strategies to neutralize it. You can see in working with one particular school, we've managed to narrow that discipline gap between Black students and white students. Just released an experimental single case study showing increases in teacher rates of behavior-specific praise for Black students and decreases in rates of reprimands, and then equity and school discipline referrals. Those are 4 classrooms. This gets a little bit bigger. This is a state level approach of working with turnaround schools, so schools that are on school improvement plans. You can see the ones that we worked with from one year to the next. So that light gray is the year before we worked with them. The dark gray is the year we provided professional development to their school teams. You can see a big increase in the discipline index, which is actually negative. So we want to see those go up. And also much greater improvements in perceived school climate using the school climate surveys that you can find on PBISapps.org. So what does this process look like for us? We have a 10-step process of walking through this. And I'm going to describe this really quickly and make sure we've got some time for questions as well. So first we meet with district administrators, build commitment there. Then we meet with school administrators. Then we meet with the school leadership team. So we keep building commitment throughout from the people in there. We start attending staff and team meetings so that our coaches or trainers are actually in there. People see them and don't associate them with, you're going to tell me about how I'm being inequitable, but actually just being helpful. Increase some awareness, maybe use some awareness building activities. Then we move through that ACT cycle of assessing data, cultural responsive practices, and then professional development on implicit bias and building those strategies. Then we walk through with follow-up with the teams and then with coaching with individuals as needed. So all of that fits into our stages of implementation. We start thinking about implementation science. So you can see those there. Most of them sort of go in this order of starting with, should we do it? So we're actually building commitment of people saying, yes, we want to do this. Then we work on installation and initial implementation, and then get to full implementation throughout. Here are some of the common errors that we run into. This is the full meal deal. This is what we usually see in schools. Boom. All you do is you send staff to a training and expect that that does it. Well, guess what? That's only 1/10 of what's really needed out there. So without this full step, you're not really working all the way through. So I'm going to share with you one more slide, and then I'm going to transfer it over to people actually doing the work, Dr. Baldi. So here's some lessons that we've learned in this work. Less effective is trying it alone, being the one voice for equity in your school district. More effective, playing what we call the blob tag approach, meaning when we meet with the district and get somebody to support at the district, then that person at the district comes and meets with us, with our school administrators. And then the school administrator is there with us being a champion at the school team. Then that school team is the set of champions for the school, so that it just builds over time. Another thing that we found is challenging is when people say, this is an important thing, so we need a new department, we need a new initiative, and we need new equity teams, and that's all that they do. We have found it much more effective to implement this work within existing teams so that we don't just raise new silos. Number 3, some of us have been brought into this work because we see the data showing inequities and we're motivated to change. However, there is often a very strong backlash against that. And what we end up seeing is that the data don't necessarily inspire people like maybe some of us who are attending this session would. We've found it more effective to use the data with the teams, but focus on concrete strategies that you can implement that are tailored for the specific data patterns. And then the last one, be perfect. Nobody wants to be lectured on equity by an equity angel. It's really important to us that we model the mistakes that we make, and we also provide the opportunity for us each time we do this to self-disclose our own personal biases so that we normalize discussing our biases and it doesn't feel like a new, scary, and different thing. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Baldi, and she is going to take us through her district's story.
Thank you, Kent. Let's see if I can take over control of the screen. There we go. All right, good. So thank you all for being here. My name is Tabitha, and I would like for you to guess what these places have in common. You can throw it in the chat box, or you can just yell at your computer screen. I won't judge you. Ah, good guess. Good guess. So I'll just go ahead and tell you. So all of these places just happen to be places that Heidi, you got it. I lived there. Yes, I've lived it. Yes. Okay. Yeah, you guys are too good. These are all the places that I have lived and worked in public education over the past maybe 18 years. A big difference is in one of these places, I feel really bad because I spent all of my career there as a classroom teacher and I loved it. but I was completely oblivious to the fact that there were equity issues. I had no idea that there was this thing called disproportionality. I had no idea how my actions in the classroom had a bigger impact on my school and on my district and on the children that I served. It wasn't until I left the classroom and started working as an instructional coach and worked in different positions at the district level that my eyes were open to this work. So I'm super thankful to see that like 1/4 of the people that are on this call with us today are, my screen's doing something funky, are teachers in the classroom. So I'm so happy that you guys are here and with us today. So a little bit about Colquitt County Schools, because I always wonder when I hear from districts presenting, like, how similar are you to my district and how different are you? So we are in South Georgia. We serve about 10,000 students across 15 school sites. We have 10 elementary schools and an elementary gifted center. And we have 1 middle school. So all of our 5th grade students, from those 11 sites like roll up into one giant middle school together. And then they go on and carry out their junior high school career together and their high school career together. Here's an example of here's a snapshot of our demographics. So we are a Title I district. All of our schools are Title I schools because we are part of the community eligibility provision program. So that means all of our students are eligible for free lunch. About 20% of our students are English language learners or emergent bilinguals, as we like to call them here in the South. And we do have the highest migrant population in Georgia because we're very much a rural community or agricultural community. So I wanted to kind of share with you our PBIS journey and how that aligns with our equity journey, because I feel like if it weren't for our Tier 1 PBIS journey, that we would not be where we are today with our equity journey. And we still have a long way to go with that. So back in 2014, 2015, our district started the exploration stage with PBIS. Should we do it? Is this something, should we even, try out this thing called PBIS? And our equity journey, we were flagged by the Department of Education for being disproportionate, specifically with students with disabilities, specifically with our Black or African American students with disabilities for exclusionary factors, so OSS and ISS. And in response to that, our district wrote a really, really bad corrective action plan. Not so bad because they created my position and posted it. I applied for it and got it. That was one of the steps in the corrective action plan. So maybe I shouldn't say it was that bad. But the following year in 2015, 2016, that's when I landed here in Colquitt County, and we started installing PBIS in 3 of our elementary schools. And we implemented that really bad corrective action plan. Because we had written it and said that we would do it. But another thing we did that was good was we started building in equity work into our district improvement plan process. So our senior leadership ensured that our schools were looking at it and they were making it part of their school improvement plans. And so there was that established commitment to making a difference with this work. The following year, we added on 6 additional schools. That was 5 elementary and our junior high, and it was very much voluntary. Hey, who wants to start implementing PBIS? And we spent a great deal of time correcting misconceptions and poor practices. And it was quite difficult to undo those poor practices that were created with that corrective action plan the year before. So that was a lot of work. But we started to seek out equity support and resources. Like what kind of resources and supports are out there? So probably like many of you, any conference session that was on equity or overcoming disproportionality, I signed up for. Any webinar, I read it. Any article, I read it. We were just, seeking out as much support as possible. The problem was there was tons of data and resources that were saying disproportionality is an issue, but there were very few resources that said, here, do this, and it'll help you fix it. Or maybe they were out there and I just wasn't looking in the right places. But that was kind of where I was. So the following year, we implemented, we trained the rest of our schools in PBIS, and we're continuing to get better at it with our cohort 1 and cohort 2 schools. And I sent a district team to the state of Georgia had an equity training. They actually brought in Dr. McIntosh, and we also began aligning our efforts with that 5-point intervention approach that Kent shared earlier. So the summer of 2017, this was my stab at creating my district team. I sent an email to all of my principals and said, hey, there's this really great opportunity to go and learn about this stuff that we're struggling with. Anyone want to go with me? And one principal responded and said, yeah, I'm really interested. So as a reminder, we have 15 schools in the district. So I went on with my district team. I invited our some senior leadership representation. I was on it, our district behavior specialist. I made sure that our friends in special education at the district level were on it. And I recruited 6 secondary assistant principals, so 2 from each of our secondary schools. And the way I recruited them was I sent them a nice email that basically said, hey, you middle school assistant principals, I think you should go to this conference. I spoke to Marnie, who's my boss. She can squeeze it into the budget. It's this date in this location. Let me know if you can or can't go. Jill will register you. So I acted like I was giving them a choice, but I just kind of said, hey, you're coming with me. And then like 3 minutes later, I sent the same email to my high school, and about 10 minutes later, sent the same email to my junior high school. So this is a really good example of what not to do. So don't do this, because that's the exact, it's a mirror of what Kent said the most common errors that people do are. So I guess I am perfectly imperfect at this. So really good model, right? So that same year, our district team equity efforts. This is what happened with our district team. Pretty much nothing, right? So, however, I still continue to work closely with our behavior specialist, and we continue to reflect on our mistakes, where we went wrong with that initial team approach. We continue to garner support from senior leadership, from not only the Assistant Superintendent of Student Services, but the Assistant Superintendents of Curriculum and Finance and Human Resources, as well as our superintendent. Continue to solidify the alignment to the 5-point intervention approach. And even created a crosswalk with, hey, these are the 5 things that the experts say. They say, hey, do these 5 things and you'll make a difference. So I kind of made a crosswalk, and I was like, okay, we're doing a good job with this one. We haven't touched this one. The shared equity data with our district leadership team. So that includes our superintendent. So making him aware of, this is where we are with our equity data. And schools, making them, aware of their data. And we do use Swiss school-wide, so that was super helpful in that, but it certainly wasn't enough. And in that 5-point intervention approach, it did say, look at your policies. So we explored revising our district code of conduct, and we totally botched that as well. So I could tell you more about that flopping if you'd like to hear about it in a different time. But we're continuing to look at how we might revise our policies as well, but continuing to seek out support and resources. So the following year, round 2, they're bringing back Dr. McIntosh all the way from Oregon to Georgia. So here we go again. Here's my second chance, right? I'm going to do it better. I'm going to have a better approach this time. So instead of forcing people to come and saying, hey, you come with me, I simply asked for volunteers, and I reached out to all of my PBIS coaches and basically asked, hey, who's interested in enhancing your Tier 1 PBIS practices by folding in equity work? We've been doing PBIS, we're doing it well. Who's ready for that next step to make it even better? And I set clear expectations. This isn't just don't sign up to go with me to this if you're just looking to get out of work for the day, because I want you to have commitment from your principal. I want you to tell your principal what you're going to and get support and approval from them up front. I need you to be a school that is implementing Tier 1 PBIS with adequate fidelity. So sorry if you're a school that just got trained this year. I'm glad that you're interested in this work, but you're not ready for this work. Even if you think you are, you're not quite ready. Although I did let a school slip in. I broke that rule, but kind of put it out there that tier 1 fidelity was important. I told them up front, these conversations are going to be hard. They're going to ask us to engage in difficult conversations. The first group that I took, when they asked us to engage in these conversations, we all kind of just looked at the table and then started talking about the football game or whatever was coming up. So told them we will engage in these conversations, and told myself that I will force myself to insert myself into conversations to make sure that people are engaging in the work. And then I wanted them to be able to commit to at least one strategy. So you're going to go to this full day conference, but I want you implementing at least one of these, and you get to pick the one by the spring. So they knew all this up front. So I asked them to pick 2 to 3 people who were currently on their PBIS team. So kind of like Kent said, like, I don't want you creating some equity team or whatever. I want 2 to 3 people currently on your team, and I want one of them to be the coach. And then I want the other 2 to be a really critical role and someone really familiar with the data and how to access it and analyze it. So a team leader, data specialist, administrator, you choose. But you have to bring your data and your technology to access it. So bring your laptop, make sure you're ready to log into Swiss, make sure you're ready to access your fidelity data, your PBIS assessments account, have your self-assessment data ready and ready to go. So we were so happy. This is the group that went, right? So we went, and like by lunchtime, I'm feeling really good about it. I was in so much denial. We took this picture at lunch. Like, I was giddy. I was like, oh, do you think Kent will come and get in our picture? And then I was like, oh, I'm too embarrassed to ask him to, whatever. But I was in so much denial at how well things were going. This guy in front of me, that's Brett. He was my middle school coach. I was totally convinced that if he squatted down in front of me, that he would be hiding my belly. That's how much in denial I was at that moment. So the day rocked along and things were going great. And Sherry and I, who's my district behavior specialist, rode home together. And we kind of thought about, we're gonna do this. We're gonna have an action plan. We're gonna, this is our committee. We're gonna meet. We're gonna meet so often, and all these things are gonna happen. And then, like, the reality of how massive this work is and how big of a commitment it really is kind of started to hit. So that was September 11th. And the very next morning, September 12th, about 8:15, the first thing I did was typed up an email. Dear Dr. McIntosh, thank you so much for coming to Georgia again. We really, really enjoyed it. And basically, in a nutshell, please send help. We can't do this. I can't do this on my own. This is massive. I need, these 17 people, I can't depend on them. Anyway, it was just like, please send help. So we started the exploration process, the full exploration process, the better of Project React, and entering into a partnership with Kent and the University of Oregon. And so in September of 2018, I went ahead and, as soon as we emailed back and forth, I gained permission to explore this partnership, lots of emails and conversations trying to understand the process so that I could then clarify it and simplify it so that I could take it back to my superintendent and gain permission to move forward. Again, sorry, my computer did a little something funky. Yeah, so gain forward again. So the superintendent basically said, I'm fine with it. Go meet with the principals and see what they say, which in my district can be the kiss of death. It's either like, he's totally, whatever you want to do. So I knew that I had to get the principals to say yes, but in a very open, and I wanted them to really want to do it, not to trick them. So I did a little prep work. I framed the meeting as, hey, I need your help in exploring this amazing opportunity. This is an amazing opportunity, but just because it's amazing doesn't mean that we should do it. So I need your help in making this decision. And I connected with the 3 principals who had either attended the state conference and saw Kent speak in either 2017 or 2018. And I basically was like, hey, remember that guy? We learned that thing. He can come here and help us do that. And they were like, oh, wow, yeah. And then I primed other influential principals by getting their coaches to kind of have like conversations ahead of time to kind of let them know like what this conversation is about. They also had already somewhat committed to the work because they allowed their coaches to go to that training. So they were already aware and already willing to allow their people in the building to engage in this work. So that really helped. And then just set the tone up front that this is their collective decision, not mine. Like, this is totally up to you guys, right? So then the day of the principal meeting, September 27th, I'm like sweating because this is so important to me. And I just knew, I was like, this opportunity cannot slip through our fingertips. So I was totally transparent. I told them I was nervous. When you bring these 11 principals together, it's like the Knights of the Round Table or something. And so basically I was like, y'all, look, we've been trying to do this for 3 years. We've been trying really hard to do this for 3 years without much progress. And I capitalized on the knowledge of the people in the room. I was like, Mr. Croft, you went to Macon in 2017. What did you think? Mr. Jones, what did you let Katie and Ashley go? What did they think? What did they bring back? And really tried to let them dialogue around, possibilities and potential opportunities and that sort of thing. And then the room got kind of quiet. And one principal was just like, and it wasn't someone that I had primed. It was somebody that I didn't know where she stood, but she goes, why wouldn't we do this? And she wasn't speaking to me, she was speaking to her peers. And that was such a pivotal moment that just kind of really just turned the tides. She's like, why wouldn't we do this? And so they had a conversation around that. And I just kind of stepped back. And so finally we were able to reach agreement on the what, like, yes, we're going to do this. Now let's figure out how we're going to do it. So we had to find a time. We needed a full day of PBIS team only, 3.5 days for the whole school, because this is a school-wide intervention. Like, literally everybody in the school receives the training, which is something totally different than what I'd experienced in the previous however many, years I've been actually trying to make a difference with this. So we had a few teacher work days that we could use. And then the principal said, why don't we add in some additional, once you ask the superintendent to add in some additional early release days, which he did. He only added in one, but that move in itself sent the message that this work is important. We revised our district calendar to add time for this professional learning to occur. So fast forward through that year, basically October through May, lots of phone calls and emails, lots of planning, building relationships between the trainers and the schools. Kent and his team actually came out to Georgia or Colquitt County in March. They met with the superintendent and other senior leadership. They met with, and then after that, we brought in the 8 principals that were going to be part of the study. And then they went out and visited and spent time in the 4 schools that were going to go first. We call them the treatment group, but they basically received the training first or last year. And then in the middle of all that, I took maternity leave from October to February, which is totally not required for this work, but makes for a really interesting story. So the schools that actually participated in the study were 8 of our elementary schools. They had to have an enrollment of somewhere between 25 and 75% Black or African-American students. They all were using Swiss. We use Swiss in all of our schools. Can't speak highly enough about it. All of them were implementing with adequate fidelity, but still experiencing racial disproportionality in school discipline, despite having decreased rates in referrals and that sort of thing, and really trying hard to make a difference. We were still experiencing disproportionality. And we had the commitment. We had already secured commitment from district and school level. So, this session is not a session on teaching you how to do React in your school. Like, there will be, other opportunities to learn more about that. But this is just a snapshot of what the training entailed. And something that was really special about it was they would come and they would teach a little bit. And with the intro to implicit bias, it was like we pushed just enough to where people were almost like too uncomfortable, and then kind of back off. And here's some strategies, right? So it was really helpful because it wasn't just like you're a bad person and you're the only one where this is an issue, but instead it was like, this is a national issue, but it doesn't have to be this way. Here's some strategies that we know can work. And so they would come and get some strategies, and then they would have time to go back and try those strategies in their classroom for about a month or 5 or 6 weeks, and then they would come back and discuss how those strategies went, discuss as a school, should we keep this strategy or should we totally trash it? And we totally trashed some of the strategies because they just didn't work, and that was fine. So the ongoing support, as well as they attended the school team meetings, the monthly team meetings that occurred. And then at the district level, I meet with my coaches monthly, and we added on an earlier meeting before the regular coaches meeting for just the schools that were participating in the REACT study, so that we could learn from each other, talk about how it's going at the schools, and so that I could just provide additional support to those 4 schools specific to REACT. So our outcome data is, this is just 1 year's worth of data. We still have a long way to go, but I am thrilled because for the first time of trying to make a difference with this work in 3 different districts, I finally have outcomes. I finally have a strategy, a plan of action that worked or is working. So this is the risk index. So it shows the percentage of Black or African American students who received an office discipline referral. And so 18-19 is the year before we started REACT, and the treatment schools, which are the schools that received the training last year, were very similar. Our outcomes were very similar to the waitlist schools. And then the following year, the treatment schools actually decreased their risk index to 15%, while the waitlist schools, who aren't getting the training until this year, really didn't budge their data, but they were continuing their work with PBIS, and these schools do a phenomenal job with Tier 1 PBIS. They just weren't quite folding in that equity work or having a laser-like focus on the equity work. This is a similar outcome slide. This is showing risk ratios though. So risk ratios, a risk ratio of a 1.0 says that one subgroup is just as likely as another to receive an office discipline referral or OSS or ISS, whatever you're measuring. A 2.0 means they're twice as likely. A 3.0 means they're 3 times as likely. So this slide shows that the year before we started REACT, both groups of schools were above a 3.0. Our treatment schools were actually pushing towards a 4.0, 4 being 4 times as likely. And then when we implemented REACT, there was a significant decrease specifically for our treatment schools, and we didn't see much of a difference with our waitlist schools, but we are totally excited to see that difference happen this year. So we still have a long way to go, but this year the plan is we are continuing to provide support to those schools that went last year. So we have a REACT trainer or coach who's still piping into those team meetings to provide additional support and assistance. We're providing the REACT training to our waitlist schools this year. It looks very different because we're in the middle of a pandemic and our Oregon friends and Texas friends cannot fly out to Georgia to be with us. So we're doing some things where we're piping them in virtually, and I'm kind of serving as a proxy, which actually works out good because it's a nice fading process. So maybe it's for the better. But we're in the process also of thinking like, how is this going to look in our secondary schools? Because we know that we need to continue this work and kind of roll up like we did with our initial PBIS plan, implementation plan. So facilitators of success, like I've said before, this is Sherry. She's my behavior specialist. Could not do this work without her. Kent knows, just like every, things like, oh, let me check with Sherry. Let me and Sherry will do that, or I'll see if Sherry can do that. And then this is Dr. Townsend, our Assistant Superintendent of Student Services. She's not involved in the day-to-day work, but she fully supports this. She puts equity at the center focus of everything. And when she's struggling with an issue at a school, she'll come to me and go, where are they with Project REACT? When is their training? How far along are they? What are they getting next? How can we help them? And then my PBIS coaches and data specialists, they are the ones on the ground leading this work. They are just an amazing group of people. But then really, it's these 17 people, that went with me to this training that volunteered to go and said, I want to be part of this work, right? This was the first voluntary group. And then there's my boss, that's Marnie Kirkland. She's the assistant superintendent of curriculum, and she makes sure that equity is in our district improvement plan, that it's in all of the school improvement plans, and that schools are focused on this work. And that in itself is just huge. And she also serves as a nice proxy to the superintendent, making sure that it's in front of him, saying, this is the work that we're doing. She meets with him on a weekly basis, whereas I only meet with him maybe 3 to 4 times a year. So it helps to constantly have that in the forefront. Other facilitators of success for us was our big focus on implementing PBIS Tier 1 with fidelity, having those monthly school-based PBIS team meetings that are focused on data, not who's going to pass out the popsicles next Tuesday, but focused on data and problem solving. That's where they should be spending the majority of their time. So it wasn't a big jump for them to, okay, now we're folding in equity data. Using Swiss is a game changer for us, but if you have another system that allows you to disaggregate, especially by race and ethnicity, that's fine too, but it is critical to this work. And then providing additional training to my data specialists. So once they get the initial Swiss training, I then bring them back in a month or two later for advanced Swiss training, where it's just we're working through the drill down process to help disaggregate the data. Having those monthly coaches meetings that are standing to maintain the ongoing learning of our coaches and kind of pouring into them so that they can then pour into their school teams and faculties. And then also having consistent district leadership team meetings 2 or 3 times a year with senior leadership, keeping them abreast of this is where we are in our process, this is where we are in our 3-year plan or our 5-year plan. Here's the issue, what are some things we can do to solve it, and having them engaged in that decision-making process. And then having a decision-making process that allows for stakeholder input and ownership. Pulling those 11 principles together was not uncommon. That's how we make decisions. If we have a big decision to make that's going to impact our schools, we bring our stakeholders together. So that existing already as a way that we do business was helpful. And then the other thing that I didn't add to this was it's critical that equity work is tier 1. It's everyone's responsibility. It is not something that the special ed department should handle on their own or be expected to fix on their own. Unfortunately, they're the ones that get tagged by the departments of education or whatever, but this is a tier 1 issue. It is an everyone issue, not just a special education issue. So with that, I think I'm going to pass you back over to Kent and let him kind of facilitate chat questions, poll questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Tabitha. So what we're going to do is we've got about 10 minutes left for questions. What I'd like you to do is switch over to that polls and start asking. I'm going to get a chance to eyeball these in a moment. While we do that, I'm going to pull up the session evaluation. It's really important, as I was saying, using data for decision making. Complete the survey for this session. For the next one, let us know what we can do to do better. So now I'm going to pull up. I have not been seeing any of the chat at all this entire time, so it's exciting to see what I have been saying very unclearly. Okay. So I'm going to go through here. One of the questions that I saw before is a question about reward systems. So I'm just going to read this one out loud. What are your thoughts on reward systems reinforcing trauma when certain students or student groups do not achieve these rewards and the same student who doesn't need the support does? That's a great question. And that goes into the fundamental ideas of what these acknowledgement systems are supposed to do. It is not one of the things that we really want to recognize is this is not a one-to-one thing. It is intermittent. It is a surprise. You should never know that you're being evaluated to get one of these rewards in terms of our tier 1 systems. And they are given out unequally to encourage students who are not getting acknowledged for doing that, which means if you're doing it right, you are seeking out students who are not currently being successful and giving them the extra boost to do it. I am a very strong advocate against anybody doing the end of term party, and you can only go if you haven't had any referrals, because we all know, you could all tell me right at the beginning of the year who are the kids who are not going to get to go to that. And you know, usually it's Black and brown students, students with disabilities, students experiencing trauma. And so if you know at the beginning of the year that is that you already know that they're not going to earn it, guess what? That's not effective. We do not want to tell people that you cannot be part of our community if you make a mistake every now and then. So please, get rid of those, get rid of the clip charts, and use the acknowledgement systems to help the students who are not being successful. And then you can use other things like the student of the week or the student of the month, or those longer term ones for students who don't need the immediate acknowledgement. Okay. A few other questions. How do you address disproportionality when the staff and students in your district are 85% the same race? One of the things that we encourage people to do is, number one, as you've probably seen with federal guidance and so on, using the, if you're using something like a risk ratio, using a comparison group as all other students is a useful step. Sometimes we work with schools that are 98, 99% Black for the student body. And what we do is, instead of saying you want to look at disproportionality and compare it to, the 10 white kids in the school or something like that, what you do instead is you say, focus on bringing down overall exclusionary discipline in the school and comparing to district averages or comparing to state averages. And so moving in that direction works a little bit better. There was a question, I think, before about, let me move through these. Now, the great news is we have the whole rest of our day to go through and answer some of these. And so forgive me for not being able to get through each of them. How about this? In a past presentation by Kent McIntosh, I don't recommend that guy, warnings are issued that implicit bias training could inadvertently increase bias. How can this be avoided in the REACT process? So what our research and other people's research has shown is that interventions to change people's racial biases are not effective. They're actually as likely to make them worse as they are to make them better. The most important things, number one, make people aware of their biases. Number two, motivate people to change them. And then number three, change the environment so it's easier to do things the right way. So in walking people through that process of identifying VDPs or vulnerable decision points and EDPs, equitable decision points in their data, those are really the most useful ways to do it, because then you're helping say, how can I be supported in making decisions that line up with my values? Or how can we support other people in making the right call at the right time? And so those interventions have been shown to be effective, those really specific ones.
Yeah, can I add to that, Kent? Because I thought that was a really good question. I was hoping you were going to touch on it or pick it. I think the other thing that REACT does is you learn about implicit bias, and then you agree as an entire faculty, we're all going to try this strategy. And so it's not, singling out Mr. Jones or Miss Smith that, hey, you are biased, you need to do this strategy. But instead we're all doing it. We're all doing it school-wide. We're going to try it out, and we're going to see, what kind of outcomes we get. And I think that helps as well, because it holds people accountable, whether they want to admit that they have bias or not.
That's great. Thank you. Tab, do you have any that you want to go through and answer as well?
I know, that's what I mean. They're all such good questions. What about the do you want to talk about the executive order? I mean, sure. Given the recent executive order, I saw UO put a really good stance out about that. We're going to continue this work, but I think you'll probably be better equipped to answer that one. I'd love to hear your response.
I can do that. This will be our last time, and then all of a sudden we'll be cut in a second. No. Okay. So if you haven't looked, there's a presidential executive order on what kind of equity trainings were okay versus not okay. And anything that said that we're a racist country is deemed not okay. I think one of the things that's really important for us in this work is there is nothing in it. Number one, it primarily affects federal employees. And so if you are not a federal employee, it probably does not affect you. So that's something that is important to know. You are paid by the state, you are paid, and so on. The federal government cannot dictate a particular curriculum that you are supposed to teach in your schools. And so in that, I think that it is useful to know that that doesn't necessarily affect anything of what you do. But if you notice, this does not talk about, it does not say do not talk about equity. It does not say do not look at your data to identify inequities. It does not say do any other changes to address those. So in all, I think we're probably being cut out and closing off, but I don't think it should stop anybody from doing the important work that they need to do. I want to thank everybody. I hope we're still on, and have a great rest of your session, and I'll be around in the chat for the rest of the day. Thank you, Dr. Baldi, for sharing. Thank you, Maria and Anthony, and enjoy the rest of the conference. You can get a hold of each of us. And once again, thank you. And remember, volunteering is mandatory. So figure out what are the steps you're going to take to make a difference. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you all. I appreciate it. Thanks, Kent.